happy Wednesday. Welcome back to Baptist for Liberty. I'm your host, Joanna Works. And today's subject, we're back on our book club, and we're on chapter 3 of our book. The book that I've been reading, just some highlights of, is New World Order, The Ancient Plan of Secret Societies by William T. Stills, published in 1990. Chapter 3 is titled The Great Atlantean Plan. So this is an interesting chapter. It's really hard for me to find bits that I don't want to read and comment on, but I'll try to limit myself. Here it starts out, according to Masonic sources, the most important mystery of secret societies is an ancient plan passed down for thousands of years by oral tradition for the establishment of a world government, a universal democracy, a new Atlantis. In the early 1600s, this plan for a new world order was in the keeping of Masons in the greatest commonwealth the world had ever known, the British Empire. English Masons believed that North America was the continent from which their new Atlantis would spring. Most people believe that the legend of Atlantis is only a myth, yet the similarities between the account of the destruction of Atlantis and the biblical account of the flood of Noah are really quite remarkable. They appear to be the same event. The difference may be just one of perspective. From the vantage point of secret societies, the destruction of Atlantis was a tragedy. Manly Hall claimed that the Atlantean legend is central to the philosophy of all secret societies. He described Masonry as a university teaching the liberal arts and sciences of the soul. It is a shadow of the great Atlantean mystery school which stood with all its splendor in the ancient city of the Golden Gates. From the biblical point of view, its destruction was a necessity because the pre-flood world had become so corrupt. And let's see, scrolling down just a little bit. Isn't it interesting that it is this corrupt pre-flood civilization that the secret societies are working so hard to reinstate? Interesting, too, is the fact that the Bible tells us that Christ will return when the same kind of society exists again. Matthew 24:37 through 39 tells us, and I don't like his Bible translation, so I'm going to read from the King James here. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Yep. Let's see, so we're going to scroll down here just a little bit. Solon was told the story of Atlantis around 595 BC, while studying with the priests of the temple of Isis located in Sais, Egypt. The legend was passed on in oral tradition for several generations before Plato heard it and wrote it down in the traditional form of the day called a dialogue. This dialogue is known as the Citrius, and it goes on a little bit about books by Masons that mentions Atlantis and gives more information. But I'm going to skip on over to some other points on page 43. According to this account, at its peak, some 10,000 years before the Greek civilization, Atlantis was ruled in complete harmony by a cooperative commonwealth of 10 kings, known as the Atlantic League. 7 of these kings ruled over the 7 islands that actually made up what was called the continent of Atlantis. The other 3 kings of the Atlantean kingdom ruled over the other 3 known continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. One day, the 7 kings of Atlantis decided to conquer the other 3 continents. They invaded Greece and all of Europe about 10,000 BC. This overt transgression of Atlantean law enraged the father of all the gods. In a single evening, Zeus caused the entire island of Atlantis, with some 60 million inhabitants, to sink beneath the waves. In fact, the record of almost every civilization for which ancient legends exist The one thing they all hold in common is a flood tradition in the distant past. In 1933, historian Emanuel Velikovsky attributed the flood to a common astronomical phenomenon, a close passage of either Venus or Mars to the Earth. And I'll pause here and comment. Yeah, when I was reading this, and I'm glad he gets into this a little bit later, but as I was first reading this book, and they mentioned the 10 kingdoms and things, it did make me think about the prophecies of the 10 kingdoms in the Bible. Another thing is about the Bible, the flood stories in other cultures that are, and I always found that was very interesting because as a kid I loved reading fairy tales, and I would read, a lot of times mythology books would be mixed in with the fairy tales, so I would read some of those, and you very quickly pick up on, oh, yeah, there's flood stories, or even if they weren't flood stories, there were stories of a perfect creation, something happening, and the deity in those stories destroying it and moving a man and a woman to another creation, a less perfect creation, or wiping out all the humans in the creations together and creating new humans to inhabit the newer creation, such as the Mayans have theirs, where the original people were mud people. And in this, it's kind of reversed because in other native stories, as the first man and woman escape what they ruined the first creation, their deity creates a lesser creation for them to inhabit. Whereas in the Mayans, it's like their god, their deities, was having trouble perfecting the creation, and so they started out as mud people, and then he wiped most of those out and created a new people that were a little bit better, and then he had to wipe them out, and he created until finally he made humans. And the cycles on their calendars mark, the mud, the corn, or something similar like that, the cycles. Anyway, I'm rambling and a little off topic, but I thought it's kind of fun though when you have a little bit of knowledge of something and it pops up in something else that you don't think is necessarily related. So yeah, flood stories, all cultures really, or some kind of destruction story. So anyway, down below, according to Hall, with the demise of Atlantis went the ideal pattern of government, the secrets of which Masons have conserved through their oral traditions. So complete was this destruction that men forgot there is a better way of life and accepted the evils of war and crime and poverty as inevitable. The old Atlantis is gone, dissolved in a sea of human doubts, but the philosophical empire would come again as a democracy of wise men. The last little bit was a quote from Manly Hall, one of his books. Alright, so we're going to skip down just a little bit here on page 44. Today, the elite of secret societies are still taught that bringing forth a new cooperative commonwealth of mankind, a new Atlantic League, is the natural and proper form of human government, and the highest calling to which a person can dedicate himself. Christians well versed in the Bible believe that this so-called commonwealth of mankind is in reality the dictatorship of the Antichrist predicted in the Bible's book of Revelation. In fact, there is a startling similarity between the Atlantean myth and biblical prophecy. Revelations 31:1 states, and I didn't pull up this verse, so I'll just read what it has, and you can look it up for yourself in your Bible. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. We're going to skip down a little bit more. The Atlantean legend seems to set the ideological foundation upon which all the secret societies rest. Whether it is the cooperative commonwealth of the 10 kings, the philosophical empire, the new Atlantic League, the New World Order, or the New Atlantis, the meaning is always the same, to establish a so-called enlightened world government. I'm having a hard time trying to find a place where I can comment on this. Like, I wanted to stop and pause and add my own thoughts, but as I was reading through this and highlighting parts I wanted to read, it's like every other paragraph like responds to some of the thoughts and ideas I had. Once again, he quotes a passage from one of Manly Hall's books, this one titled "The Democratic Tradition Preserved by Secret Societies." For more than 3,000 years, secret societies have labored to create the background of knowledge necessary to the establishment of an enlightened democracy among the nations of the world. The rise of the Christian Church brought persecution, driving the guilds, the secret societies, into greater secrecy, but all have continued searching for human happiness under a variety of rituals and symbols, and they still exist. Yep. Okay, so his next little segment in this chapter is called Secret Societies in the Ancient Americas. Secret societies have been active in most civilizations since the beginning of recorded history. Primitive secret orders have existed among African tribes, among the Eskimos, and throughout the East Indies and Northern Asia. American Indians, the Chinese, Hindus, and even Arabs have elaborate religious and fraternal organizations. This is interesting, and I think it calls back even to the mythologies here. And, you know, from the biblical standpoint, we understand these people, the different nations come from the one people, that one family, Noah and his family, and their descendants were at the Tower of Babel, and so now the descendants of those who were rebelling against God at the Tower of Babel were scattered and make up all these nations, and they carried with them, even though they couldn't communicate with one another because of the division of the languages, which caused them to scatter, they maintained the knowledge that they had and of the pagan worship at the Tower of Babel. And I think in some ways the secret societies and what they believe about their origins is a little accurate. If, you know, Atlantis is the pre-flood world, the form of worship, the mythology that they have existed before the flood, and is why God wiped them out. And now he's very long suffering. You know, he has, well, he's always had his plan. This wasn't plan B or C or D or something like that. But you know, he's going to allow them to come up into power, and it's going to be just like it was in the days of Noah, when he does send his judgment. I lost some of my train of thought on this about the secret societies and mythologies, but they do have a common source, and I just think that if you study these side by side, a lot of the biggest differences between them is the names of the deities, which goes back to, well, God separated them with the language, and sometimes other minor differences based on the culture that they developed as, you know, they moved away from the Tower of Babel. You know, there's studying cultures is so fascinating to me because, you know, there are so many similarities, and where there are differences, I think it's interesting to see how we got to be so different in the way of our thinking. But again, the secret society notion, this shared mythology, the idea of Atlantis and the flood, it all brings it back. And I think it really does, you know, if you study the Bible, you can understand how this can be, how there can be so many similarities, and how this happened. From a worldly perspective, I don't know how you reconcile it. I suppose if you're one of those people in the secret societies, then you do think, oh, all this stuff is preserved from our shared secret societies. Yeah. So, That's what they think is their shared heritage, is is in their secret societies, rather than the Tower of Babel and God, who is merciful and benevolent God, spreading them. I mean, he's wrathful and he will judge the wicked, but that doesn't take away from how good he is. And I just wanted to reinstate that, because in this book, as they point out, that the secret societies, Gnosticism, Illuminism, they believe the creator God to be evil and mean because he wants to keep information from people, whereas Satan or Lucifer is good because he brings light and knowledge. And later in this chapter, I think it mentions in Greek mythology, I forgot the deity that defied Lucifer. Defied Zeus. Okay, so anyway, I'm just going to keep on reading here. Ancient Masonic lodges have been discovered among the American Indians. Former newspaper editor and 32nd degree Mason John Loughran recently found what he called an ancient Indian Masonic lodge at an Anasazi Indian archaeological site. Loughran writes, "The furniture was placed the same way, and the area where the main rituals took place seemed 80% identical to the Masonic lodges in America now. The only difference was that these temples were round. Then I did some research and found out that in northern Africa the Masonic temples started out round. In the ancient lodge, he was able to decipher symbols left by the Anasazi Masons that led him to a locator device. That device in turn led to a hidden library. In this library there were 50 rock and clay tablets, which he dates between 1000 and 1200 AD, written in what appears to be Arabic. It is interesting to note that the name Anasazi means ancient ones, and this again was published in 1990, so you have a frame of reference when he says recently discovered. It's relative to the book publishing. Also, as I was reading that last little bit, find symbols that lead to a locator that leads to a hidden library. It made me think of that movie, National Treasure. It was a fun movie. It was very enjoyable. The only thing I didn't like about it was it made Masonic lodges and the ancient secret societies look like the good guys. Which, of course, Masons and Hollywood and Gnostics and such are in Hollywood. So, yeah, they would make a movie that made them look like the good guys, the defender of knowledge, the protectors. So, yeah, that just the clue leading to another clue leading to another clue that leads to a library. I thought that was very National Treasure plot right there. Alright, moving on. Even the name America may be the product of ancient American secret societies. In an 1895 edition of a magazine called Lucifer, published by the Occult Promoting Theosophical Society, author James Price gave an interesting insight into the meaning of the word America. He said that the supreme god of the Mayan culture of Central America, known as Quetzalcoatl, elsewhere was known in Peru as Amaru. Amaru's territory was known as Amaruca. According to Price, from the latter comes our word America. Amaruca is literally translated land of the plum serpent. The priest of this god of peace once ruled the Americas. All the red men who have remained true to the ancient religion are still under their sway. So still under the sway of the priests. And of course, and he makes this point about, Lucifer, Satan is that serpent. So here they had the cultures, and our own country has a name that could trace itself back to this pagan worship of the devil. Yay! There's that for patriotism. Okay, and of course this was written in 1895. Huh. So, anyway, but one might take that with a grain of salt and think, well, okay, but he's writing for the Lucifer publications. It's pro-occultism. So, some people who are in the cult, any religion, you try to find connections with what you believe and the society that you live in. So, does it mean that for sure that America is named after it, or is this just, finding a clue, another clue to make what you believe fit the world that you live in? It could be either one. You could take it with a grain of salt, but as we've known with Masonic, lodges and read in earlier chapters about the layers of meanings. And so, like they said, Americans can accept something benign, and then as you become more and more privy in the higher echelons of the secret society, you get a higher knowledge, you get a different meaning, and then you move higher and there's yet another meaning. So this Amaruka, is this a true meaning, or is it just a superimposed one? I don't know, but I think it's interesting. Most historians attribute the name America to explorer Amerigo Vespucci, but Manly Hall claims that since the serpent is frequently symbolic of Lucifer, it is no exaggeration to extrapolate from this that America may well mean land of Lucifer. To the secret societies, Lucifer is always depicted as a benevolent, peace-loving god with nothing but the best intentions for the human race. And as it goes on, like I mentioned previously, that it states about the Greek mythology, and Prometheus was the titan who defied Zeus and brought light, fire down to man. And secret knowledge is often depicted as fire. And let's see, it goes on and talks about Sir Francis Bacon, who lived from 1561 to 1626. And let's see, I'll just read it very briefly here. No, actually, I'm running a little out of time here, and I'm not going to be able to cover all of that. I thought, this was really interesting. I wanted to get through this whole chapter in one segment, but it looks like I'm going to have to read the last little bit and maybe the first part of chapter 4 in our next little book club reading and conversation. Alright, if you have a chance to read this book, I do recommend it. I mean, I'm still reading through it. I'm a little bit ahead of what I've been reading on the program, but I think it's definitely an interesting book and worth reading. Let me see. Okay, some quick announcements. So since it is summer, well, technically last month was summer too, but we were on the theme of manhood and things, and so I couldn't quite fit everything together, and plus it was being the first month of doing the podcast, trying to get everything balanced here. But one of the new things that we're adding on, because it's summer, is we're going to do a series of movie reviews. So this month is July, and I've chosen for our theme and topic for this month Christians in warfare, both historically and what the scriptures say, what is the scriptural view of warfare. And because Jesus is called the Prince of Peace, and he brings peace, but he's also going to bring great destruction at the end times. He does bring judgment. In the Old Testament, there were certainly times of judgment, and now that, today, as we're looking forward to the end times, there's a lot of people calling for holy war or whatnot, and I would like to discuss, how is that biblical or not biblical. But since warfare in general, and it's July, so a lot of people think about the 4th of July, so you might think I would look at some patriotic movies on the American Revolution, but instead I have decided to focus on Civil War movies. And the reason for that is I think that what was founded during the a revolutionary war really is not the system we're under. What we got because of the Civil War is actually the system that we are under. That was a drastic change, and I really want to look at that. But also, because we are talking about, Christians and Christian attitude towards war, both sides of the American war believed themselves Christians, believed that they were standing on Christian principles, that they had a biblical standing. So I think that makes a really good place to start for looking at that. And also how it affects our culture. Movies totally affect our culture, and that's another reason why doing movie reviews would be very interesting and I think helpful. I hope helpful. So yes, I have I think 5 or 6 movies that I'm going to be looking at. There's one documentary that I really wanted to get, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get it on time. But I did find a couple of other ones to watch in its place, so we'll see. I'm going to do the vast majority of those reviews, I think, this weekend, and I will be uploading them to my YouTube channel. So, and linking them and putting them on our website. So if you don't know my YouTube channel, don't worry about it. I will have it on our website. So all you have to do is go to baptistforliberty.weebly.com. So Baptist for Liberty, all one word, WEEBLY.com. Okay? Alright, and with that, it is time for our chapter of Proverbs for the day. Today being the second, we are on Proverbs chapter 2. Actually, just before we read this Proverbs, we're talking about secret societies today and knowledge, and I think there are a lot of people, sincerely, they're seeking after something to either be a part of something bigger than themselves. So like this great plan, they're seeking after knowledge, and they think they're seeking after wisdom. But as we've read, I believe we read before the Proverbs that, it says that the beginning of wisdom and knowledge is the fear of the Lord. And when you're running away from the one true God to puff yourself up, you're not going to have wisdom. But we believers, we can turn to the scriptures, and this particular chapter, it begins with affirming that we can have wisdom if we listen and attain to what these scriptures are telling us. So take heed of these warnings, and you can't take heed of them if you don't read them. So make sure you're reading. And I know I am at fault. I don't do my daily reading like I ought to. There was days where we had pre-recorded, so I didn't end up reading my Proverbs for the day because it was already recorded for me. And yeah, I'm not saying that as brag, but I'm just saying I understand. It's really easy to not read your Bible every day. One of the blessings I've gotten out of this, doing the radio show, is it has helped me with staying on top of my Bible studies more than I used to. So I do want to encourage you on that and make those comments before we read the Proverbs, because I like to just read God's word and then close out with that. So, okay, I'm done rambling. On to Proverbs chapter 2. My son, if thou wilt receive my words, and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom, and apply thine heart to understanding. Yea, if thou criest after knowledge, and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver, and searchest for her as for hid treasures, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord, and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. He layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. He keepeth the paths of judgment, and preserveth the way of his saints. Then shalt thou understand righteousness and judgment and equity, yea, every good path. When wisdom entereth into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul. Discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaketh forward things. who leave the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice to do evil and delight in the forwardness of the wicked, whose ways are crooked, and they forward in their paths, to deliver thee from the strange woman, even from the stranger which flattereth with her words, which forsaketh the guide of her youth, and forgetteth the covenant of her God. For her house inclineth unto death, and her paths unto the dead. None that go unto her return again, neither take they hold of the path of life, that thou mayest walk in the way of good men, and keep the paths of the righteous. For the upright shall dwell in the land, and the perfect shall remain in it. But the wicked shall be cut off from the earth, and the transgressors shall be rooted out of it.